Okay.
Believe Doug will give a few words and I'll go. Since he is the founder and the president, we'll give him the honor to start and we'll take it from there.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much, Mona. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. I'm honored and pleased to be here and to kick off this important conversation. Mona Lou Cherkaoui has shared with us an outstanding geopolitical global iconic leader, Dr. Houman Sadri. I was not aware, Dr. Sadri, of you until now, and I'm so honored and pleased that you can join Global Chamber today. Having read now your background and your illustrious career, you have such a great global vision. And so we're really looking forward to hearing more about your perspectives on what's happening in the world. And you might have all heard that there are things happening in the world today. You know, AI is basically changing everything. There are wars, there are trade issues, there are the normal things that always happen in the world, including poverty and dissension and love and peace and people coming together trying to make a better world. All of this is an amalgamated activity that's going on right now. And I think Dr. Sadri will help us make some sense of it. And certainly that's my hope. What do you think, Mona? Will we come out of this feeling better or worse?
I hope we will come off feeling better because that's the purpose. We need opportunities and we need to look at things from different lenses than the regular people. Every issue that we face, we ask, okay, what does this mean? What are the opportunities available to us? And that's how we need to start looking at the world instead of fear mongering and buying into everything that we hear. So this is the opportunity, and there's no better person for that, the Dr. Sadri. Hopefully, we will get into his presentation shortly. But I told him we need opportunities here. We need to know what we do next.
Well, Mona, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Doc. Thank you. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the Chamber for inviting me. I'm going to be a very, very honest academician for you. I'm not going to, first of all, try to make this one to be an academic presentation. We are going to be putting our feet on the ground and we are going to talk about opportunities. At the same time, I'm going to mention that there are some challenges. We cannot keep our eyes only closed to certain restriction that exists right now in the nowadays world. I would be doing actually more of this one from next year when I go for retirement. I'm not planning to actually sit at home and watch reruns of Seinfeld or Friends, Instead of writing academic books, I'm going to start writing books that actually the general public can use in that regard. I've had the opportunity from early period of my life when I finished the PhD program at the University of Virginia to actually be approached. My very first job offer was actually from a business. Sometimes I have told my students about that, and that was from Chase Manhattan. So they contacted me and they said, "Well, we were very interested in hiring you." I said, "I'm so sorry, but I think maybe you got the wrong person because my area of concentration is political science, international relation, and my geographic areas, former Soviet republics and the Middle East. I have no idea about banking." They said, "Well, actually, we are not interested in hiring another banker. We're interested in somebody who has an understanding of the, politics, and they can tell us, and help us." Because at that time, this is in, early 1990s, right after the demise of Soviet Union, they had an office called Political Risk Analysis in Manhattan. And they were telling me that because they're lending so much money to many of the, former Soviet republics and other, developing countries and everything, they want to have an understanding of the political risk for those things. So that was very interesting for me. Now, to make a long story short, I didn't accept their offer, even though it was it was an offer three times more money than what I received from an academic perspective. But what it did for me was it led me to know that I should keep probably just one foot in academia and then the other foot as a government and business consultant. So that made my lectures for the students to be a little bit different from the lectures of my colleagues because I always have examples from my consulting activities, and that end up being very fine. I'm very proud to have contributed to successful business people such as Mona herself. I'm very proud of her, and a number of other ones who are right now working with different agencies. Well, having said that one, so let's get started. So what I decided to do, I actually teach a course about international political economy. What I decided to do is talk about, some of the major themes. Of course, we cannot go to all the little details about everything. Could we go to the next slide? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to show some of my, major themes that we are going to cover. And we're not going to go into a lot of depth. So we're going to cover what we call, first and maybe sometimes second heading. And then I would leave all the detailed questions for what? For, basically the question and answer period. I'm going to make sure that we would have that. So generally speaking, in terms of the main presentation theme, I should say that some of the material that I'm going to cover is going to deal with the restructuring of the global alliance. That's very important. The whole notion of the, supply chain alignment is another major theme. Another one would be energy politics and the regional leverages. And then, of course, I would also talking about opportunities, I will cover some of the opportunities in some of the middle powers, because their role has changed. These include countries like GCC states, global, basically Gulf Cooperation Council, India, Turkey, Brazil, Morocco, and a number of other ones that I'm going to mention. And also, the last but certainly not least theme would be the slow shift toward multiple, and a multipolar basically economies. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay. Well, in this slide, I'm basically focusing on the geopolitics, not just as a background noise, as some people have typically referred to it, but as something that is really directed to a number of things. Market access, supply side reliability, energy prices, sanction risk, and last but certainly not least, what? Investment, security as we go on. Next, please. Okay, so how does this one work? Why you might ask, why geopolitics now matters for business? Well, since COVID and the Ukrainian war and the US-China rivalry, geopolitics has done at least three major things that we can identify. One is the shortening the planning horizons. Then second is increased regulatory uncertainty. And then last but certainly not least is the forced firms to rethink where and with whom they should do business. Okay. So the key point right here would be the geopolitical risk is now a core business risk, not just a government issue, and that's very important. Let me give you an example. In 2022, many Western companies in Russia, they lost all their assets, not because they were doing poor business strategy, but because of the geopolitical shock that was created due to the invasion of Ukraine. Next slide, please. Okay, so in that regard, when we focus on the restructuring of the global alliance, we should mention a couple of things. Number one, what are some of the, these changing things? One changing phenomenon is the shift from globalization toward block-based economic alignment. Is that right? So here we are talking about, for example, at that time we had something called NAFTA, which, as you know, during the first, Trump administration, that was restructured, modified, a little bit, but, with a new name. Okay. We will talk about that later. And also the decline of the unipolar, rules-based, global order, because right after the demise of Soviet Union in 1990, people were looking at the United States as the only, superpowers in the world. And basically, there was no question about American currency. In fact, from a, academic perspective, we were referring to the U.S. as a hegemonic stability force. There's that, basically a great power that provides security, currency, which is basically considered a public good, and that would promote business. Okay. So there is a shift in that regard. So the key alliance, shifts are the traditional US, EU, UK that they were going together always very well, with especially the second term of our president. There has been shift on that one. US in a way under the whole notion of America first has kind of stayed away from complete coordination with the EU. UK, as you know, left EU, has its own. So there's tremendous amount of complexity than than ever before. The other shift is the China and Russia, interesting enough, has become realigned. Now, this is very interesting because they do not have identical interest, but they shared opposition to the Western domination. So that's another one. And last but certainly not least in this regard is the growing autonomy of what we call non-aligned and middle power. Could we shift to the next one? Thank you. Okay, so in terms of again restructuring of the global alliance, I should mention that what are some of the business implication of it? As I mentioned, the trade rules are really differing by what? By the bloc. Like for example, even if you focus, let's say, on the West, is that right? The EU trade, rules are different from what nowadays, what we used to call NAFTA, what we call nowadays USMCA, basically US, Mexico and Canada. For example, in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, agreement, there is a more of an acceptance of GMO foods. Okay, but traditionally, the CAP or Common Agricultural Policy of the EU was refusing originally completely any kind of GMOs, foods. Over time, which is a opportunity for us Americans. They have started to accept, as the research has come up and everything, they've started to accept more and more of GMOs. However, they still require tremendous amount of information on the labels of these type of products. Another important change is also the investment decisions are increasingly becoming political and politicalized. So an example for this would be a tech, firm that must navigate basically the complex US-China export control on semiconductors. And semiconductors, as you know, exist everywhere. They are not a luxury. They are in your car. They are, in producing your products. They are, they are everywhere around us and our appliances and everywhere else. So it's not an abstract notion that deals with only high tech. Financial institutions face also secondary sanctions sometimes and the risk of that. Next slide, please. Okay, in this slide, what I was thinking about is to basically address the question where smart business should pay attention. So, as I mentioned, I said I'm going to talk about some opportunities. Here we go. These are some of them. So, where is the capital, flowing? The very first thing that I like to highlight is smart firms track where money is moving, not just headlines. If you're focusing headlines, you're behind, so you need to be ahead of time. And so in that regard, I wanted to highlight at least three areas. One is the critical minerals and strategic resources. So investment in lithium, in cobalt, in rare earth material, in copper, these are extremely important. I put some examples over there for you, like mining and processing in, let's say, Chile, Argentina, Australia, some parts of Africa, which is supported by Western and Asian capitals. Defense and security and dual use technologies. There are more and more and more of these type of products and services. Okay. So this is rising spending, on aerospace, cybersecurity, semiconductors, and of course, AI. And then the third area is the digital infrastructure. So in that regard, capital flowing into the data centers, cloud services, fintechs, and of course, AI. For example, that I put right there for you, it's like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. So there are a lot of opportunities there. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So what about, so since I already mentioned some areas, how about some geographic region? In that regard, I have 5 geographic regions for you. These are not the only one, and these are not all uniform. However, I thought we can talk about this thing, and then hopefully during the question and answer period, we can talk about some of them in more details. One area is the Persian Gulf Arab countries. better to say, what we call the GCC countries. These are Gulf Cooperation Council countries. That I put a map over there just below that for you is Saudi Arabia and the smaller sheikdoms. Please notice that Yemen is not included. Please notice that Iraq is not included. Please notice Iran is not included. Is that right? So, this is important. And in addition to the Persian Gulf countries, I actually included Morocco. Mona, are you happy with that? So then in that regard, I have to say that, for example, the traditional Arab states in that region, which were very much focused on basically, hydrocarbon, fossil fuel, they've become very, very pro-business. I mean, they realize that their non-renewable source of, oil or natural gas is going to end. So they have moved to become very pro-business because they need to somehow survive as population has grown over there. So the pro-business, reforms and sovereignty wealth, funds and mega projects, you can see it all over Saudi Arabia, UAE, and etc. The second region in that regard is Southeast Asia. So this is benefiting from the supply chain diversification away from China. So countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, they're offering a lot of tax incentives for manufacturing and electronic firms. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay. Some of the other areas, one is India, which obviously India is the most populous country right now. But being most populous doesn't necessarily mean you're the largest market. But India has become the largest market because the middle class in India has grown significantly. As you know, India is about 1.4 billion, but not the entire 1.4 billion people are not actually a market for us. We consider something is a market which includes people, capital, and the desire to what? To trade. So in that regard, their middle class still is very significant. And but they're still working on it, and there are some opportunities because of that. So it's the regulatory reforms over there. India is becoming more and more business oriented, which goes very much against the traditional, political economy of the country, production linked, and incentives. So companies like Apple and other suppliers are moving over there. This is despite the fact that our president is really discouraging them. Another region is Central and Eastern Europe. So this is an area we call nearshoring for EU markets because there are a lot of skilled labor. But the labor in Eastern Europe is much cheaper than Western Europe and than the US. So that makes countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary to be very, very attractive for investments. And of course, last but certainly not least, is Latin America. It's this resource, basically rich, and energy, transition level. So, for example, Chile is a very fine example in terms of positioning itself for a hub for lithium and green hydrogen investment. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so in continuing with this notion, I want to also mention that geopolitics and your business are connected as you focus on the other side of it. And in that regard, I'm focusing mostly on what we call SMEs, or small or medium-sized enterprises, not just MNCs, because many of the MNCs, they already have very sophisticated divisions that they focus on these areas. Okay. So one area that you should focus on is the indirect exposure through supply chain. So even if if MNCs, I'm sorry, even if SMEs, they do not trade directly with sanctioned countries like Russia, Iran, they can be still affected. For example, it could be in the part and services and software. And if they're, the company that they're dealing with, like an MNC, because they're a supplier to that, it's exposed in those countries, then they are going to be indirectly affected as well. Also, compliance cost hits, SMEs much harder. Why? Because many of the unlike many of the MNCs, SMEs, they do not have the teams that they could help them. But nowadays, they require due diligence, and screening and reporting, and these type of compliance software and teams and everything, they really increase the cost of operation, which makes it very difficult. Next slide, please. So, in terms of other factors that they should be considered, one is the export control can restrict the innocent products, and here I'm particularly focused on what we call dual purpose, goods and services. So, these are of course goods and services that civilians they use, but they also have potential for what military use. So, this has been an area that we really needs, paid attention to. And number four is the financial and banking constraints. Sometimes, the banks that are in between a transaction, they do what we call basically, over compliance. They are so concerned that maybe one side could be a sanctioned country like Iran or Russia or others. So they basically withhold or they cancel the letters of credit. So this is something else that, SEMs, should consider. Next. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so here the issue would be where should, where are some of the smart money can pay a little bit more attention. Three particular regions I'm concentrating. One is the Indo-Pacific region away from, China itself. Okay, so in the Indo-Pacific, this is the fastest growing economic zone and the center of the supply side. So a lot of the governments are really willing to court, a foreign investor with different type of, incentives. Yeah. Best example in that regard are Vietnam with electronics and manufacturing because Vietnam economy was so connected to China, they're trying to get away from that China's orbit. And Indonesia investment in nickel, which is basically very important for what? For EV, batteries. Next. Okay, Persian Gulf again comes out here to be a significant area because of, as I mentioned, if you even look at the geographic, dimension of it, you see that Persian Gulf is very naturally and strategically located. It's basically located between what? Between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Is that right? Which is the historically, connecting the three old worlds. So in that regard, countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, they started benefiting from that. You focusing on logistics, fintechs, regional has become a regional headquarter for many MNCs. In fact, I have a picture at the end of it to show you. When I was a child, Beirut, the capital of, Lebanon, used to be considered, the Paris of the Middle East. A lot of the multinational corporations that would go and establish their, headquarters over there. But over time, after the Civil War started, and then conflict in the region, which in many ways is not the fault of the Lebanese themselves, but they are in the middle of it with very limited, military capability. So many of the businesses they moved away. And then at the same time, UAE has been becoming such a hub that many large corporations have decided to establish their, headquarters, regional headquarters there. Saudi Arabia is also another very, interesting case. Saudi Arabia has started focusing on mega projects, tourism, beyond pilgrimage and everything, and renewable energy. Excuse me. And then last but certainly not least in that regard is near-shoring regions like Mexico should not be ignored, and Eastern what? Eastern Europe. So Mexico has been very important in terms of manufacturing. Excuse me. In terms of manufacturing for the U.S. supplies. And of course, countries like Poland and Czech Republic the same way. Could we move on? Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm hoping that it doesn't cause any more trouble. So there are also two, as I mentioned, there are opportunities, but there are also risk areas. One risk area is if I were a businessman, I would try to avoid high tension, great powers rivalry zones. These are areas that US, China, and Russia's interests, they go against each other. And it can cause problems, especially for smaller firms. So, for example, I put two examples over there. One about US, China, even though that they are supposed to be rivals and competing at the same time cooperating, but it can cause some complication. Russia and Eastern Europe is also another region in that regard to be careful. Next slide, please. The other area is very attractive, because the potential for making a killing in terms of profit is high. But this is an area which is politically unstable, but it's very resource rich, regions. These are areas include some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, includes even countries such as Argentina and Brazil. Argentina is very attractive and, has been for a number of reasons, but the currency instability of this country, the debt crisis makes it kind of iffy. Sometimes Brazil is an amazing country, is that right? A superpower of the futures, a business superpower of the future, but you have to then deal with the, sophisticated Brazilian and the complex Brazilian bureaucracy and the regulatory, aspect. Next one, please. Okay, so having said all of these things, what are some of the things we should consider? I think that there's a blind spot for some businesses. They have to consider that now governments are active, market players, not just neutral referees. This is very important. Many business leaders, basically, they still assume that markets operate independently of politics. Well, this is good for, ancient history, but not nowadays. And then I can talk more about this one during the hopefully question and answer period. In reality, states are now shaping markets. They directly, affected through policies and subsidies and broad restrictions. So the blind spot shows up, and then we should consider four factors. Number one is industrial policy is back. In the modern period, we see industrial policy. The first country that really used industrial policy was Japan. That was during their reconstruction, right after World War II. But nowadays, many governments, they use that. They saw what a miracle that industrial policy did for Japan and a number of other countries. So governments, they pick strategic sectors and they fund them very, very heavily. For example, the subsidies nowadays for semiconductors and EVs and US, EU, and Asia. The next area is that, rules changing faster than the business cycles, So sanctions and export controls, investment screening, they're altering plans overnight. So, a business leader has to be aware. They cannot just, focus on the yesterday news. They have to focus on tomorrow's news. Next slide, please. The next notion is that geopolitics overrides efficiency. Usually in the business, we focus on efficiency. We focus on lowering the cost. But many times, certain governments, they prioritize security over cost. Let me give you a classical example. Right after the demise of Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, which was one of the main oil producing, parts of Soviet Union, was interested mostly to what? To export its oil to the West. And many Western countries, they were very much interested in diversifying their what? Imports of fossil fuel. So Azerbaijan was a great case, all right? Well, many of the businesses, large corporations, smaller corporations, they said, well, luckily Azerbaijan is just north of Iran, and Iran has a north-south, pipeline system. So all we need to do is invest a little bit money through pipes connecting the other resources to the northern Iranian transit system. And then from the southern Iranian transit system that goes to the Persian Gulf, we can easily ship all this oil to the tankers. Well, US and certain, European countries, they were very much against that. They said, well, if we do that one, then we would be at the mercy of the Iranian mullahs. Okay. So even though it made tremendous amount of business sense, this is a real case. Okay. They decided to spend billions of dollars and notice the pipeline. I put a map of it over there for you to realize how complicated that was. They moved the pipelines away from, of course, Azerbaijan toward Georgia, not even going through Armenia. Why? Because Armenia, Iran, and Russia were in some kind of alignment. So they didn't want to even give Armenia any kind of interest in that regard. Going to the Turkey and then finally coming out in the major port over there, port of Ceyhan. So this is a classical example. We are not talking about, in theory. And then the number four factors that I would like to mention is that all firms are affected, not just multinationals, but also as SMEs. They face compliance, banking, and those examples are important for all of them. So let's move to the next slide, please. The next notion is that all firms are affected, not just multinationals, but also SMEs. They face compliance, banking, and those examples are important for all of them. So let's move to the next slide, please. The next notion is that all firms are affected, not just multinationals, but also SMEs. They face compliance, banking, and those examples are important for all of them. So let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so in this slide, what I wanted to say is, answer basically a couple of questions like why leaders miss it. Is that right? I think one problem is that the over reliance on the pre-2018 globalization assumption and the whole notion that we have in business, we say, well, we create win-win situation. Well, win-win situation, but who are your partners? What are the rules of the game? The rules of the game has changed. You need to change with the rules of the game. So if the focus on the quarterly performance have been unfortunately, too much and not enough on political risk aspect. Viewing also geopolitics as a background noise, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, not as a core variable, a factor that really makes or breaks something. So strategic takeaway from these, smart businesses would be, treat government as a partner, as a competitor, and as a regulator. So be aware of them and be very, very, careful because overnight things can change very quickly in the political scene. Monitoring also, policy signals, that it's coming out toward the market, not ignoring them. Also building a political risk and, awareness into your general business strategy. Not just, crisis management, but actually maybe hiring sometimes a consultant or something to provide you with an outside perspective in that regard. Next slide, please. Okay, so if there is anything that I would summarize my entire presentation and I would like you to remember it, is that the biggest blind spot for today's business leader is assuming that markets remain free and neutral. And when governments, this is happening in the environment that governments are not actively shaping winners and losers. Okay, so having said that one, we can move to the last slides. And I would like to thank you. And I'm open to any kind of question you might have.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sadri, for this informative. It's a lot to unpack. I can tell you that how much there's a lot of information there. I will say, we are regular people trying to cope with the news and see where we can position our businesses to succeed. So every day we are faced with new news, different news. As you know, you were born in Iran, and you know the area. You specialize even in your pursuit as a geopolitical expert and international affair professor. You know what's happening right now. We are faced with the news of Iran, USA, possible conflict, and is getting interesting by the day. Then there is Russia and Ukraine, where Ukraine just hit Russia just a few days ago, and that's a huge thing. Then we're waking up to Afghanistan and Pakistan going to war, and then you have China. We're just so consumed by negative news, and we are just regular people trying to make living. So, what would you say about all these conflicts that's happening right now? Starting with the Iran-US conflicts, which is huge, obviously. It will have an impact on our lives, our businesses, and everything that we are accustomed to here. What do you see there?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. Um, just remember that for media and general public, it's a nature of mankind that media covers conflict. Okay, um, you know, uh, you know, uh, the idea that on the first page they say that, oh, in such a geographic area there
Take
is,
this one in this school. As a document?
it seems like they're ending our presentation or something. I heard something. I'm not sure.
No, you're good. We have until 10:45, and we will give time for the others to
Okay.
ask questions. Go ahead.
Okay. So the whole notion is that by the nature of it, media focuses on the conflict, because that captures the headlines that people pay a lot of attention. Once in a blue moon, when the World War II finish or when a war finishes, they say, "Oh, peace has come up." But then after that, they focus. So I think a very bright, business person should find all these opportunities not on the first page. It would be on somewhere on page 6 or 7 or something like that. but they have to be aware of that. They don't need to be a scientist to do that, but by just keeping themselves informed. If they feel like they're too busy, they're maybe a wonderful accountant or a marketing person or a finance person, and politics is not something that they do, they can always hire, or, I mean, you just need to Google it. Is that right? Hire area specialists in different area. For example, I mentioned examples about Latin America and other places, and I can talk about it generally speaking, but I particularly focus on the former Soviet republics and the Middle East. That's the area that I focus on. But I know of people who do the same thing for Latin America, for Africa, for other regions. So there are those opportunities over there. You have to be just aware. I wouldn't be disappointed with what is going on. Of course, businesses they would like to see a situation which is peaceful, because if you go in an area which there is a possibility of a major conflict, you could lose whatever assets you have. So I would stay away from as I mentioned during the presentation, in the high conflict area for now. But I think eventually in the long run, there is a tremendous amount of opportunities to use. Okay. Even in conflicts like with Iran or with Ukraine, you can position, your company outside that region and deal with that area through what partners.
Dr. Houman, this is Khalid Munir here.
Hello, Khalid.
Good to meet you again. Yeah, right now we just focus on the conflict with Iran, and the US's policies seems to be the narrative seems to shifting on a daily basis. It started out with nuclear, then it was changing the regime, and then it was et cetera, et cetera. What do you think is a true narrative in this conflict?
Okay, very good question. Well, I wouldn't refer to it really as a US policy. I think in that regard, President Trump has a tendency to set the agenda himself. And he's the well-respected business person in certain corners. But in terms of strategy and politics, there is tremendous amount of confusion. Okay, what we know and what traditionally has been established is that the U.S. is concerned about three aspects of Iranian war politics. Number one is the enrichment of the nuclear material. So as of now, Iran has to our best estimate about 450 to about 500 kilogram of highly enriched uranium. We're not talking about uranium at a 5 or 10 or 11%. We are talking about 77 to about 80%. That's very high. Is that right? This is not something that you can use any kind of hospital. You use this one against your, for your client, you're going to kill the client, So this is something significant. But Iranians are holding on that one because it's one of their bargaining chip. The other aspect of Iranian American concern is the Iranian ballistic missiles, and we saw last June that was a factor that the Israelis had to deal with. Israelis have been very, very proud of what the so-called Iron Dome, but the reality of it is that Iron Dome, without our ships being strategically located in Red Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean, even in a part of Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, if they wouldn't been helping, you can easily overwhelm the Iron Dome. Okay, instead of sending 10 missiles or 50 missiles or 100 missiles, but in the groups of 10 or 15, you can send 2,000 missiles. What are you going to do? Is that right? And unfortunately, Israel, being a small country, is very vulnerable for something like that. So Israelis are more concerned about that one, very frankly, than anything else. And for Iranian, that's basically one of the bargaining chip. Last but certainly not least, the third factor is Iranian proxies. Now, since basically the October 2023, when the Israelis they basically started responding to some of the Iranian proxies, in that regard, the capability of Iran has decreased. You see what has happened to Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria's regime has changed. So, Iran right now is at the weakest position ever. So that's what our president is hoping, that because he's at the weakest position, I can force him to get a deal much better than what the Obama administration was able to get. But what he doesn't realize is in politics, you can't get things very, very quickly, usually build up. And what the Obama administration was trying to do is they were interested in the same thing too. But the first, treaty was to focus on the nuclear one as a what we call confidence building measure. So when that one would work out, then we would move to the missiles, and after that we would move to the proxies. President Trump, is not a very patient person in general. So he wants things a little bit faster and quicker, and we will see if he's going to be able to get it or not.
Thank you so much. Any question? Any other question? Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Making the assumption that things may or may not, but hopefully will settle, let's say in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, is there anything short run that SMEs and even the global companies can anticipate some of these things that can happen in a couple of weeks? Is there a system out there that allows future think, like Russia invading Ukraine? Did we know it was coming, that kind of routine?
Well, I mean, thanks to the, our technological, revolution, we noticed that there were buildup of the Russian forces in, near, Ukrainian border. However, capabilities can tell you something. I'm a very, a strong believer of human, information. So we can take pictures of some cars, license plate or something, but we do not know what this person is going to do with this car. They can just drive somebody, they can be an Uber, or they can use the car as a machine, put a bomb in it, and run into what general public or some kind of, peaceful demonstration, as has happened, In that regard, I think information through what we call human resources, I guess the general public, they call them spies, is that right? It's still very important in the 21st century. So when I train the students at UCF, I try to encourage a lot of them to enter the community, intelligence community, was because just taking pictures of the capability doesn't say anything. Intention are much more important, and then we can get the intention to communication and having interaction with people. Conflict is a part of conflict is not an unnatural thing; is actually part of human behavior. The issue is not a Shakespearean question. The question is to be or not to be. The question is más o menos, as they say in Spanish, more or less. So what we need to do in terms of conflict is just to be aware that it can happen, and then try to see if we can manage and decrease first of all, the frequency of it and the intensity of it. That's what we can do. And are there opportunities for a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses? I think in the future, yes. Because I think a lot of multinationals, with the technological revolution, they're becoming, more interested in having all these, smaller firms. You can see that trend in Japan, in Europe, in a lot of other places, that they're using smaller firms to, specialize in producing certain products or services for them, and then they put it all together. I mean, look at, for example, right now, your cars, right? Your Ford, GM, or whatever. You open it up, each one of the parts is made in different countries. You see what I mean? And is with different producers. So that's going to be the trend. So I think the future in that regard for small and medium-sized businesses is very good.
Does that answer your question, Jim?
It just it's an information gap, I guess. Future information gap would be the question. Right now, like I said, the multinationals are having the same situations as SMEs of not really what's going on, even though they're on K Street with everybody else. That there are certain things happening even multinationals are not aware of until it happens, and then you have to react to it.
Well, it depends on what yeah, MNCs you're talking about. There are some MNCs that are a little bit closer to the administration. There are some that are not. Okay, the ones that are closer, I can guarantee you that they have a better understanding of what is going on because of either certain services or certain connection, personal connection. So we cannot really generalize. But I would see in that regard, and the smaller, and the medium-sized businesses are at this disadvantage because they don't have usually the access to such a thing. But most of the multinationals are in a better position to either absorb the damage or to get the information or, to move on from a region to another region. So yes, Jim, you're absolutely right. In that regard, small and medium-sized, enterprises that are more in danger than the bigger ones, if that's what you're.
Okay.
I also provided, I know that we have limited time,
Yes.
so I also provided my email address at UCF. And if you have more questions, feel free to send me an email over there. And then I would be more than happy to answer it. And if there are needs for, other presentations or more specific one, Mona asked me to give a general one. I asked her, I said, what is the main audience? She said, oh, a little bit of everything, this and that. So as you notice, it basically was going to a nice, Italian. My presentation was basically going to a nice Italian restaurant and trying different type of antipasto. Is that right? Now, if you're interested in only Italian version, is that right? Then we can provide that one. Or if it's focusing on Latin America or the Middle East or other regions, it could be. But this was supposed to be a very general, presentation focusing on a number of different industries and regions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadri, for your time, and thank you to everyone who attended today's session. We do this every month, and every month we will bring in a guest to highlight certain subjects of interest to us, those who are working hard and trying to make a living in a crazy world right now. So I thank you so much, Dr. Sadri, and please be our guests. You don't have to present. Attend our sessions and participate and be part of our movement here, be part of what we are trying to do in Central Florida, and that is taking our Central Florida to the world and bringing the world to Central Florida. Thank you so much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for this opportunity. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.